Assalamualaikum and very good afternoon to our lecturer, Dr. Ani Mazlina Dewi, and my fellow friends. So first of all, let me introduce our presenter for today. The first presenter is me, Muhammad Ashraf. The second presenter is Adira Alisha. The third presenter is Aiman Haris, and the last one is Ahmad Lufi Hadi. So now let's continue our presentation for today. I will start our presentation. Okay, now let's start with the introduction. So, what is assessment? According to Doolittle, 1995, assessment can be defined as any planned technique used to measure, judge, or diagnose a student achievement and to make an inference based on the evidence for on variety of purpose, including planning. So, how it help physical educator? Assessment are a tool for the physical educator used to measure the skill, fitness level the student and learning and attending in their physical education class. Assessing in physical education help to show others like a parent, school administrator, and other teacher, including yourself, what students are learning from your physical education class. Okay, now let's move to the next slide. Important of the assessment. For the first one is to provide the feedback to the student. Feedback is an essential part of the effective learning. It helps students to understand the subject being studied and give them the clear guidance on how to improve their learning. Assessment in physical education focus on their progress and the mastery of the skill. The next one is to help to motivate the student to improve their performance. Assessment can help the student to motivate or to become motivated. If students know what they're doing poorly, they may begin to work harder. For the next one is to determine whether the students are meeting the learning objective. Assessment is the key component of the learning because it helps students to learn. When the students are able to see how they're doing in the class, they are able to determine whether or not they understand the course material. So the assessment can help to determine whether the students are meeting the learning objective. For the last one is to help to measure the skill and the fitness level. Assessment are really important because assessment are the tool for the physical educator used to measure the skill and the fitness level the student are learning and attending in their physical education class. As a physical education teacher, we can use the assessment to help display that we doing our job as a physical educator. When the student assessment show their fitness or skill level are increasing, that help that your physical education and that proof that your physical education program is credible and valuable. In all subject area, there are three types of the assessment, which are known as assessment for learning, assessment as learning, assessment of learning. These three types also known as diagnostic, formative, and the summative assessment. For the first one is assessment for learning. This form of assessment allow the teacher to understand the student prior knowledge prior to beginning with a new lesson. An example of this assessment for learning may include the short assessment that focus on the key of knowledge of the concept. In the physical education, it may be as simple as asking the student who remember to dribble the ball and look for the show of the hand. As a few of students to show to the day class how to drive dribble the ball properly. The next one is assessment as learning. This form of assessment occurs during the learning activity to provide the teacher with the information on how his or her student doing. This will inform the teacher or what she need to focus on her student that may have not catch on the first time around. The type of the assessment may be involve the questioning or restrict observation of the skill in the gym. For the third one is assessment of learning. This form of assessment is typically done at the end of the term and the unit of the physical education. It used to assess the student learning over the term of the lesson and assess skill acquisition by the end of the term. Okay, now let's move to the next slide. Physical education teacher challenge in implementing the school-based assessment in Malaysia. For the first one is knowledge of the subject. Parents tend to ignore their role due to failure in understand the current change in the learning and assessment approach. Despite explanation has been given to the parent by the teacher that student can execute the assigned task at home, parents were unable to provide the appropriate and sufficient infrastructure and resource, or give the proper guidance to support the completion of this task because the parent were poorly informed. Consequently, the teacher faced the difficulty to do the follow-up activity with the students since they were unable to complete the assigned tasks at home. Okay, now let's move to the second point. Facility of the physical education assessment. Problem faced by the physical education teacher when doing the activity for the physical education assessment included those that related to availability of the physical facility and the tool, and as consequence, some of the assessment activity were conducted within poor condition. To overcome this constraint, physical education teacher use the alternative equipment, or through they know that the result obtained will be less accurate. Another constraint of this teacher face was availability of space and area to implement the physical education assessment activity. The availability of the large and sufficient area such as a game court and the football field to implement the physical assessment will be contribute to the effectiveness of the assessment. Urban school face the problem in securing at the sufficiently large area for the sport activity because of the high estate value. The structure of the school or the build up the area will be another hindrance. Hence, this school provided relatively small of the narrow space of the physical activity. Okay, for the third one is classroom management. Another constraint that a physical education teacher face in the implementing of the assessment activity physical education included the class size. In carry out the assessment, physical education have deal with the problem to complete the syllabus. This is because they have allocate more time on the subject that have made the assessment with a relatively large size class, plus they need to ensure that all students can properly assess it. The physical education teacher need to ascertain that appropriate adjustment to the number of the student within a class, as well as the level of their achievement, to ensure that no student are left behind and can master the skill according to their ability. Okay, that's all for me. Now I will pass to the next presenter. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Aiman, and for today I will present to you guys about the subtopic of issues on assessment during online learning. The presence of the coronavirus, or known as COVID-19, has caused the world to change almost entirely from all aspects, such as economic aspect, political aspect, educational aspects, and others. The Ministry of Education Malaysia has issued a directive that school session be continued online for all levels of education from kindergarten to university level. Thus, most of the classes has been changed into online class session, and some issues has arisen toward the implementation of assessment in physical education subject. There are 3 issues on assessment during online learning. The first issue is that it is difficult to assess the students during online learning. The second issue is that the assessment being conducted solely through lectures and assignments only. Lastly, the issue is that it is just very time consuming to assess all students during online learning session. The first issue about the difficulty to assess students during online physical education classes. Educators found that it is difficult to apply assessment to online physical education classes. This is because it seemed unreasonable to evaluate students on what they had learned through online learning session only. As an example, in a Google Meet session, there are so many students and it is hard to assess all students at one time, as some of the students may close their camera and some of them also may have problem with their connection. Thus, it is hard for the teacher to assess all the students at one time. For the second issue about the conducted solely through lectures and assignment. The assessment during online learning will be conducted solely through lectures and assignment without the students performing and practicing the activities to be evaluated, particularly because the proportion of the evaluation based on physical activity was high given the nature of the subject of physical education. This differs from general subject evaluations, where written examination based on online coursework can be administered after the return to in-school classes. As an example, in order to evaluate a gymnastic movement, the students were asked to take a picture of themselves doing the gymnastic movement and upload it. However, there were limits in uploading the entire gymnastic movement, and so the evaluation was made in partial movement only. For the third issue, about the time consuming for large schools to determine whether the students had submitted the assessment materials and then to actually evaluate those materials. Although students could submit physical education performance evaluation in the form of videos and written assignment, it would very time consuming for large schools to determine whether the students had submitted the evaluation materials and then to evaluate those materials. As an example, when the students and instructor are in the same place at the same time, giving verbal instruction and feedback is easy and natural, while during online learning, sometimes the student has internet problem. Thus, it takes more time for the teacher to assess and give feedback to all students.
We have done a quick interview with Teacher Nur Hidayah binti Amran from SMK Taman Pelangi Indah, Ulu Tiram, Johor, to discuss about a problem in assess student understanding in online class. She mentioned that the assessment in PE is not clear in online learning because PE is a practical based subject. As example, when teacher teach TOTAPs using slide, student cannot apply the step in TOTAPs because there is no practical occur in the learning process. Moreover, teacher not be able to correct the mistakes that have been made by the student in performing the step in TOTAPs. Thus, teacher cannot measure level of students' understanding throughout the learning process. Also, she take an initiative to give students homework for measuring student level of understanding in the learning process. But unfortunately, students are not giving cooperation to complete the task because they think PE subject is not important. Next, teacher Iman from SMK Tropicana mentioned that there is no communication between teacher and students in the online learning process because students did not give cooperation to turn on their camera and microphone. Students also have problem with their internet connection and did not have smartphone or laptop to join the online class. Thus, assessment towards the learning process cannot be made because students actually are not joining or participating in the learning process.
Diagnostic assessment. So, diagnostic assessment can help physical and health educator to identify their students' current knowledge of a topic about their skill sets and capabilities and to clarify misconception before teaching takes place. Knowing students' strength and weakness can help physical and health educator better plan what to teach and how to teach it. So, what is diagnostic assessment? Diagnostic assessment, or can also be known as pre-assessment, are made to determine what a student does and does not know about a topic. It also determines a student's learning style or preference. And the third one is to determine how well a student can already perform a certain set of skills related to a particular subject or group of subjects. Then, diagnostic assessment also used to inform the instruction. This is to mix up the initial phase of assessment for learning. The purpose of diagnostic assessment. There are three purposes of diagnostic assessment, which is the first one is diagnostic assessment is often undertaken at the beginning of a study to assess the skills, abilities, interests, experiences, level of achievement, or difficulties of an individual student or a whole class. The second purpose is this assessment informs planning and programming, teaching and learning methods used, as well as assessment choices. The third purpose is to guide skill development. The result can be used to guide skill development by examining the impact of various patterns on the overall quality and accuracy of the interpretation and determining priorities accordingly. There are two types of diagnostic assessment, which is the first one is pre-test. The second one is self-assessment. As for the pre-test, it is focused on content and to assess the abilities of the students, while for the self-assessment, it is to identify and assess students' skills and competencies. So, to know the example of the pre-test and the self-assessment, let's go to the next slide. For the example of pre-test, during an activity, the educators themselves have the students to play, throw and catch a football across the gym. Then the educator themselves will use a checklist to make note of observations. The checklist been made with the student's name and the different type of skills that should be performed by them in the activity. From the table shown, it is the end result of the observation made by the educator throughout the class session. From the checklist being made, the educator has given a tick when that student perform that skills well, and no tick when the students perform the activity without performing the skills. Then, for the student that perform the skill during the activity but in an imperfect manner, the educator will state their wrongdoing when they perform that skill. This checklist result will be announced to the students so that they can know their current skill on that activity and what they need to improve as they know what they do wrong. For the example of self-assessment, as an example, when we give 4 options for the students to choose as their daily PE grade each day, as an example, for the first option, wow, for the second option, good job, and for the third option, keep on trying, and for the fourth option, need more effort. So, from the option given, the way we do this assessment is by lining students up at the end of the class and having them touch the signs that are on the wall as they are on their way out class. While in an online class session, the student can leave their comment based on the option given on the chat box. Thus, this indicates the grade they are giving themselves for the day after the class activity. The benefits of diagnostic assessment. There are 6 benefits, which is the first one is it indicates students' prior knowledge. The second benefit is it will assess the learning that has occurred during a teaching and learning session. The third benefit is it can help instructors to adjust the content and activities to encourage more effective learning. And the fourth benefit is it will make the teaching and learning session more efficient and effective by zeroing in on content that needs to be taught and mastered. And the fifth benefit is it will motivate the students to seek accurate information and practice. And the last one, it will demonstrate to the students that their instructors care about them and also care about their success as learners. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum and hi to our lovely lecturer, Dr. Ani Mazlina Dewi, and to my fellow friends. I would like to continue the presentation and I would like to discuss about formative assessment. Okay, what is formative assessment? I will give you a simple scenario, okay? Imagine you are going to take a road trip and you have decided the destination, and then you will keep driving until you get there, okay? But along the road, you would definitely keep checking or keep tracking your direction by using GPS or Waze, which you want to make sure that you were still going in the correct direction. Okay, that is what formative assessment is. Assessing overall progression. This is about checking in on the student progress and the effectiveness of your teaching strategy. Okay, this type of assessment is to assess the progress of student learning throughout the learning process. And this form of assessment provides teacher with the information they need to create for improve their teaching style. But you need to remember, this type of assessment do not count towards grade on your report card. Okay. Next, what is the objective of the formative assessment? Okay, first for teacher, it will help teacher to recognize where students are struggling and address problem immediately. Okay, as a teacher, we need to discover how well their students are progressing. Feedback from the formative assessment inform teachers about the progress of their students and helps to close the gap between the actual and desired performance, which means formative assessment helps to identify problems for improving teacher learning style. Okay, second, for students, help students to identify their strength and weakness and target area they need to work. Feedback from the formative assessment help teacher to understand, help students to understand their progress, and it should focus on what they can do and what they need to improve. Okay, formative assessment provides students with feedback which allow them to see that their effort in improving their performance. The example of formative assessment is first is self-evaluation of performance and progress. Second is question and answer session between teachers and students, and third is observation. Self-evaluation of performance and progress. Self-evaluation on performance progress can be made by distributing a questionnaire that consists some question to measure students' progression. Students need to answer the questionnaire, and teacher can reflect the progression based on the self-assessment that have been made by students. As you can see on the example given, which a simple question to measure the knowledge of students and self-assessment on variety of defensive strategy in play floorball. Okay, after student have answered the simple question, and then teacher can measure the level of understanding or level of knowledge of student towards the certain skill. Question and answer session between teacher and student. Example of question that teacher can ask to measure student knowledge before starting the class is, first, did you guys experience on how to dribble a ball before? And second, do you know the correct way to dribble a ball? Okay, based on the student answer towards the question, teacher can measure student knowledge about the topic or skill they need to learn on that day. Moreover, to identify student skill before teacher start to teach, teacher also can ask student to perform it first before teacher show the correct way, or teacher teach the correct way to perform the skill. Next, the question that probably teacher can ask to measure student understanding on that day lesson is, did you guys understand today's lessons? And after asking the question, teacher may ask a few students to perform the skill they learn on that day. Thus, teacher can identify student level of understanding. For observation, teacher can observe their student understanding or student progression or ability in performing the skills they learn on that day. Based on the observation, teacher can measure either students adapt towards the learning or not. Moreover, teacher can make the reflection of the learning process based on the observation that have been made. Last but not least is the benefit of formative assessment. First is enhance student motivation. This is because formative assessment involves setting learning goals and measuring the progress towards achieving the goals. Thus, it will increase student motivation to achieve the goals that have been made by teachers. And then, focus and targeted feedback. Feedback can highlight the understanding and can inform students on how they can improve their learning rather than listing what they got wrong. Thus, can make a positive learning process between teachers and students. And lastly, improve positive learning achievement. Providing students with regular feedback on progress toward their goal is the main function of the formative assessment. And then formative assessment helps students to close the gap between their current knowledge and their learning goals.
Thank you to the previous presenter. My name is Ahmad Lutfi and I will continue to present about summative assessment. What is summative assessment? According to Coffey 2012, summative assessment are cumulative evaluation used to measure growth after instruction and are generally given at the end of a course in order to determine whether long-term goals have been met. What is summative assessment? Summative assessment refers to the assessment of participants and summarize their development at a particular time. For example, in our country, the Ministry of Education has said when a student reach 15 and 17 years old, they must undergo PT3 examination and SPM examination. Especially for SPM examination, the knowledge that they gain when they are in Form 4 and Form 5, they will be tested during the SPM examination, and that is the example of summative assessment in our country. Second one is used to evaluate student learning, skill acquisition, and academic achievement at the conclusion of a defined instructional period. And lastly, typically at the end of a project, unit, course, semester, program, or school year. For example, in university, throughout the semester, the summative assessment will be done at the end of the learning course. For example, after finish 14 weeks of learning, the final examination is an example of summative assessment. Now we move to characteristic of summative assessment. The first characteristic is it is an assessment of learning. The second one, it focuses on the outcome. For example, summative assessments such as examination or final test focus on the result or the outcome of the learning session. If the student get higher score, then it shows that the student have achieved the learning objective. If the student get lower score in the exam, then it shows that the student failed to reach the learning outcome or objective. And it provides teacher and student with information about the attainment of knowledge. If the student get high score or answer the question about certain topic correctly, then it shows the student that the student have achieved the learning objective. And the goal is to evaluate student learning at the end of an instructional unit by compare it against some sort of standard or benchmark. For example, if a student get a certain score in the examination, for example, if the students get 85% score, the student get an A standard. If the student get below 40% or 30%, then the student fail the summative assessment. And summative assessment assess whether the result of the object being evaluated meet the stated goals. And the last one, high stake or high point value. For example, examinations such as final exam or final test usually have high point value, and it carries 60% and 40%, sometimes 40% in a certain course. And for SPM examination, sometimes it carry the whole marks is carried by the examination itself. So there is no other coursework or other assessment. Next, we move to types of summative assessment. The first one is final project, such as portfolio, research paper, and travel out. Second one is chapter and unit test. For example, like we all always done after finish learning a certain chapter in the online class, then usually we will have tests at the end of the learning session. The third one is semester test, midterm and final test. The fourth one is standardized test. Standardized test is like SPM examination where all the candidates must sit for the examination and they will answer the same question for all the SPM students in the whole Malaysia. The fifth one is college admission test. For example, when we want to enter the education course, student must sit for the MedC examination where it will measure the students' interest whether they are qualified to become a teacher or not. And the last one is end of course evaluation. Lastly, we move to benefits of summative assessment and the limitation of the summative assessment. The first benefit is summative assessment is necessary to determine student grades and placement. For example, if a student get really high score in a certain subject or examination, then student will be allowed or be given opportunity to change into a better class, a better course on, and also to a better school. For example, student that enter a high quality school will be available or have the opportunity to study with other students that have the same achievement as the student. The second one is to promote teacher and student accountability. It will promote teacher and student accountability, especially student, because summative assessment is high stake or have high point value. Because, for example, the students are responsible for their marks in an examination because they are responsible for themselves. And summative assessment, such as, for example, the SPM examination, is important to determine whether the student will have the opportunity to pursue their study to university level or not. And the limitation of summative assessment is tendency for over-reliance on summative measure. For certain courses like vocational and other technical course, they have many hands-on activities and also practical. So by depending only on summative assessment is not correct, because the students need other type of assessment to measure their practical work and their hands-on work. And the last one is summative assessment may promote cheating due to high level nature of assessment. Of course, especially when the students feel like the pressure of the examination because it carry high point value, the student will tend to cheat because they don't want to fail the examination. Failing the examination shows that they did not reach the learning objective and they fail to reach certain standard set by the teacher or their family. That's all from me. I pass to the next presenter. Thank you.
Okay, now let's move to the next slide. Thing that you should remember when you assessing and evaluating the physical education. Evaluation should be not completed based on the unit you teach. It should based on the expectation that you covering. For example, in the volleyball, there is no unique mark for the volleyball. However, you may covering the several expectation when you teaching unit in the volleyball. You must evaluate this expectation separately and not lump them all together. Okay, that's all from us. Thank you for watching this video.